Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to this tutorial video on advanced drum sampling using Sampler in Logic Pro 10. Now, as most of you guys know, in Logic 10.5, they replaced the EXS24 with Sampler, and there are some pretty big changes and new things to learn with Sampler, but there are some little peculiar things about it that I'll show you in this video. Another thing is, I'll say this right up front, this is a long format video for advanced sampling in the sampler. So if you're not interested in that sort of thing, click away, go watch some other video on, basic drum sampling and drum machine designer. But if you want to learn a thing or two about advanced drum sampling in Sampler, stick around. Building velocity layers, round robin cycling using groups, using hi-hat exclusive groups, and also building a multi-output drum kit out of a collection of over 100 samples. So the goal here is not to build an electronic drum kit. The goal here is to build an advanced, multi-sampled, realistic acoustic drum instrument. And the samples that I'll use for this video, I'll make available for download for free, and I'll leave a link in the description and in the comments below. So let me give you an example of what we're going to do here. So there you go. It's a sort of vintage sounding drum kit. It's very open and airy. It's, definitely not like a modern rock or metal kit. So when I sampled this, I only used two mics. I used an Austrian Audio OC18 as a mono overhead, and then I used an Earthworks SR20 LS on the kick out. I actually have reviews coming on both of these mics soon. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But a two-mic approach really lets the room come through, and you're not relying on close mics like you would with like a modern drum setup where you'd use 10 or 14 or 16 mics. Here, the tone is very reliant upon the room. All right, so I've got a blank software instrument pulled up with Sampler loaded on it, and then I have all of my drum samples here. Okay, so the big thing here with making this sound realistic is variation. So what you'll see is with most of these samples, there's multiple samples. Actually, with all of them, there's multiple samples. And what I like to determine up front is how many velocity layers do I want? So how many layers of dynamics do I want for each drum? And also, how many individual strokes of each drum do I want? Or round robin cycles, as we'll talk about later. With my toms, my kick, and my snare, I wanted them to be velocity sensitive, and then I wanted 5 strokes per drum. So you'll see there's 5 claps. Actually, this is just me and my girlfriend just clapping our hands in the room. But again, doing it 5 separate times. I have 5 crash highs. Same cymbal, just crashed 5 different times. Crash low, crash mid, a snare flam, a bunch of different hi-hats. So hi-hat close, hi-hat loose, hi-hat open, hi-hat pedal, hi-hat wide open. And then when we get to the kick drum here, you'll see there's kick A, 1 through 5, and then kick B, 1 through 5. So kick A is the loud kick. And then when you get down to kick B, it's a bit softer. So what I'll be doing is separating this into 2 different velocity ranges. 5 ride cymbals. I intentionally kind of hit it with the side of the stick. 5 rim taps. And then for the snare drum, I wanted to give it even more dynamics, because typically with most drum kits, you'll have the snare drum on D1 and E1. There'll be two different versions. So I did snare A 1 through 5 is like a loud rim shot snare. B is a loud non-rim shot snare. And then C is a softer non-rim shot snare. Then I have tom 1 through 3, and there's tom 1A and tom 1B. So again, I split these into different dynamics. There's a loud dynamic on A and a softer dynamic on B. So I have tom 1A, 5 of those, tom 1B, 5 of those, tom 2A, tom 2B, the softer dynamic, tom 3, the floor tom A, which is the loud dynamic, and then tom 3B, the softer dynamic. What I actually did with my kit, and I'll show you how to do this, is I added a 4th tom. The drum kit itself only has 3 toms, but what I did was I took tom 1, I took all the programming that I did with it, and I pitch shifted it up by 2 semitones to get an upper 4th tom. Now, if you want to create your own drum kit, you're sampling your own drum kit, you can go as crazy with this as you want. You can do 10 round robins if you want. You can do 5 velocity layers. It's completely up to you. It's just keep in mind that the more layers you have, the more work is going to have to be done. In the main window here, you can hide and show your synth and modulation matrix and your modulators. Really, for sampling, we're just going to be using mostly the mapping and zone tabs up here. As opposed to the EXS24, you don't have to open up a separate like edit window. It's all right here. Now, the mapping area is, very reminiscent of the EXS24. So it's not like a complete, 180 from the EXS24. A lot is the same, but there are some little weird things. Let me show you one of the weird things that I encountered first, just so you can kind of keep this in mind. In the EXS24, you were able to take 2 samples and overlap them. In Sampler, you can no longer do this unless those samples are broken up into different velocity layers. Like right now, clap 1 has a velocity, is only going to be triggered by a velocity of 89 to 127, whereas this bottom one is 0 to 88. Now, if I take clap 2 here and I pull its velocity layer all the way up to 127, clap number 1 is going to completely disappear. In the EXS24, you could overlap multiple samples on the same key, whereas in Sampler, you cannot. You actually can, but you have to put the two in 2 different groups. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to create 5 groups for each set of instruments. And the reason why we're creating 5 groups is because the only way to create round robin cycling is to create different groups. So for example, if I wanted these claps here, if I pull all these claps in and I click here to go to zone view, and by the way, there's 3 views up here. There's zone view, group view, and then there's like a keyboard view. In keyboard view, you'll see all 5 of those samples. They're all on different keys right now. Now, let's say I want all 5 of these to be on, I'll put them on D sharp down here, D sharp 0. Right now, with all of these in the same group, you're not going to be able to stack these on top of each other. So what you have to do is in group view, create enough groups, 1 for each sample. So you can go to group, new, or you can press Control G, and I'll create 5 total groups. And I'll just rename these clap 1. Actually, hang on, I can just select all of them and rename them clap 1. And then I'll just change the number on each of these. Now what you can do is you can go back to zone view and you can select a group and you'll see all of the samples within each of those groups. But right now, all of my clap samples are in this one group. So I want clap 1 to be in group 1, clap 2 to be in group 2, and so forth and so on. So what I can do here is while I'm in zone view, go up to view, go down to visible zone list columns, and make sure that group is shown. So let's scroll over and you'll see group assignment. So all 5 of these samples or zones are assigned to clap 2, which is why I'm seeing all of them here. So this first one, I'm going to set it to clap 1. Clap 2 is fine in clap 2. This will go to 3. This will go to 4. This will go to 5. So now I have all 5 of these in different groups. Now the thing is, because these are all in separate groups, now I can assign them all to the same key. So the way you do that is you would think it's the key right here, the pitch key. It's actually not true. It's the key range. So the key range is the number of keys that make up that sample zone. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take each of the samples in each of these zones and move them onto the same key. So again, I'll click here to go to keyboard view. Clap 1 is already on D sharp 0. Clap 2, I'll move that down. Clap 3, I'll move that down. Clap 4, I'll move that down. Clap 5, I'll move it down as well. Now, one thing you want to make sure that you don't accidentally do is pull up or down when you're moving these, because you see this changes the velocity range. So unless you're using velocity layers, you want to make sure that this reads 0 to 127 on all of these. 0 to 127 and 0 to 127. Okay. So really what's happening is you're hearing all 5 of those samples play at the same time. And you're also hearing them getting cut off. Basically, the length that I hold the key is going to determine how long the sample is. So what you can do is for each of these samples, you can turn on one shot, which will make the sample play back its full length, regardless of how long you hold the key down. Also, for drum instruments, you're going to turn off the pitch option because we don't want the pitch key to affect the actual pitch of the note. The key range and the pitch should hypothetically be the same, but if your key range and your pitch are different values, it will transpose that sample up or down, and the sample will not be in its original tuning. So we're going to be turning off pitch on all of these samples and turning on one shot for all of them. The thing is, we're still hearing all 5 of these at the same time. Let's say I want to alternate these. Well, the way you do that is you go to View, go down to Visible Group List Columns, go to Round Robin. Creating round robin cycles in EXS24 was a bit more complex. There was a special parameter called Select Group By, and it's actually gotten a little bit easier here in the sampler. So in my groups view, I'll just turn on round robin for all of these, and you'll see it's automatically assigned them to a round robin cycle. So when you click up here, if you don't see these other options, you'll see like A.1. That means it's the first group that's going to play. Then you choose 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's say you had a 6th one down here. What you do is you select Add to End, and it'll add it as the last cycle in that round robin group. So now when I play the claps, watch what happens. They alternate. So you get some variation on that sample, and you no longer have to worry about the same sample being re-triggered over and over again. So it gives it that element of realism. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually, instead of calling these groups clap 1 through 5, you could just call them like group 1 through 5, and you could load all of your kicks, all of your snares, all of your hi-hats to all of these groups, and keep them all in this same round robin group. The problem with this, that we'll find out later, is that if you want to create a multi-output instrument where each drum goes to a different channel so you can mix them individually, you can't do that if everything is going to the same group, group of 5 here. Also, there's some things we'll learn about in just a bit about creating exclusive monophonic hi-hat groups where hi-hat groups have to be separate from the rest of the drum kit as well. So it may seem a bit complex, but we're going to be creating a group of 5 groups using this exact same method I just did here for every single drum in the kit. So let's move on to, say, the kick drum. I've got kick A 1 through 5, kick B 1 through 5. So I'll drag all of these in, and what it'll do is it'll put them in sort of like a placeholder group. And what I'll do is go back to groups view, hit Control G 5 times. And I'll call this, call all of these kick 1. And again, rename these. What I'm going to do here with all these kicks is before I assign them to these groups, let's get some of this other stuff out of the way. Let's turn off pitch. Let's make them all one shots. I can't change their key range yet because they'll start to overlap. But what I can do is create velocity layers. Let me go in here, and you see these 5 are kick B, and you see these first 5 are kick A. So kick A is my upper velocity layer. So for kick B, let me pull this down to like 89. So what I want is a velocity of 0 to 89 to trigger these 5 samples, but from 90 to 127 triggering the upper louder samples. So I'm going to just drag these over just like so. And there you go. So this is what I was talking about before. It's kind of a pain that you can't overlap samples that are not in velocity layers anymore, but you can very easily create velocity layers quicker than you ever could before. So it's really that simple. Now the only thing that's tricky is we need to assign these to each of their groups. So I'll go back into zone view here. I'll assign the first 5 to kick 1, kick 2, kick 3, kick 4, kick 5. Then my B samples, kick 1, kick 2, kick 3, kick 4, and kick 5. And I can delete my little placeholder group, and I'll just double check my samples. I should have 1 A sample and 1 B sample in each group with a velocity range splitting it up. 0 to 89, 90 to 127. So there's kick A and B1, kick A and B2, A and B3, A and B4, A and B5. Okay, cool. So now I just need to put these on the correct note. So I'm going to follow the GM drum map as best as I can. If you don't know what that is, just do a Google search for the general MIDI drum kit. What it is a standard order for where drums are supposed to go, with the kick drum on C1 and other drums above it. So I'm going to be following that as best I can. So kick 2, it's put this on C sharp, so I'll just pull that down to C. 3's on D, I'll pull that down to C as well. There we go. And again, make sure you don't accidentally make any changes to velocity. You can track that down here. If you look right here and you pull over to the right or left, it'll show you how much added or reduced velocity you've added. So if I just make sure this is at +0, it makes sure I'm not adding or reducing the velocity at all. So all 5 of these are on C1 now. Go back to groups view. Go ahead and turn this on, and oh, look at that. It's automatically set these to my B round robin cycle 1 through 5. So now, with my kick on C1, it cycles them, or I can play soft or loud. So again, much more realistic than simply just dragging in a single kick drum. Okay, let's move on to the snare. Snare A, 1 through 5, snare B, snare C. And then I can't forget about my flam. I've got a snare flam. And then I also have a snare rim tap. All of those are snare. So this is a bit more complex. The first thing I'll do while these are all in a group together is I'll turn off pitch, turn on one shot, and then what I'll do is create velocity layers out of the B and C samples. So like I said before, what I want to do with these is snare A is going to be by itself. It's going to be on E1 here. And then snare B and C will be in velocity layers on D1. So then C, I'll make this 0 to 89. I'll just pull that under the B samples. There we go. So those are all set up. And then my flam, snare flams, are going to go on D sharp 1 here. And then the rim tap will go on C sharp 1. Again, following the GM drum kit. Okay, so back to zone view. Let's assign each of these to their corresponding groups. So starting with flam 1, go to, oh, we need to create groups. We haven't created groups. Go to group view. Let's create 5 groups. I'll just name these snare 1, and then rename these. Go back to zone view, select my placeholder group, and then assign these to the correct snare groups. 2, 3, 4, 5. And this, this may seem like a really tedious process, and it is. It totally is. One thing I've found that's helpful is if you like to build a lot of your own custom drum kits like this, you can set this up once and then use it as a template for later kits. You can just swap out the samples. And the last snare sample to group 5. Okay, so now in each group, I should have a flam, a rim tap, and 3 snare samples. And that is exactly what I have in each of these. Perfect. Okay, back to groups view. Let's turn on round robin for all 5 of these. And bam, just like that, one click, we've got this set up in a round robin cycle. Now back in the keyboard view, I can go to each of these snares and I can set them where I want them. So snare A here, by the way, you can see the name up at the top here. Snare A is going to go to E1. Snare B and C will go to D1. The flam will go to D sharp 1. And then the rim tap will go to C sharp. And then I'll just repeat that process for each of these. Let's try out our snare. So I got soft snare on D1. Loud snare on D1. Loud snare rim shot on E1. Flam on D sharp 1. And then rim tap on C sharp 1. Awesome. Let's move on to the toms. You could put all of the toms in a single group, or you can put them each in their own group. It's completely up to you. You save a bit on programming by putting them all into one group. But the problem is if you try to multi-output them, you'll just have one channel, one stereo channel for all of your toms. I wanted them to be completely separate in the mixer. So in mine, I put them in each in their own group. But what I also said earlier was that I'm going to create an additional tom by pitching up the first tom. So let me drag in all of the tom 1 samples, and I'll show you how to do this. So again, it creates a placeholder group here. Turn off pitch, turn on one shot, just like we did before. Go to keyboard view, take the B samples, pull down their velocity range to stop at 89, pull them under the A samples, just like I did before. There we go, instant velocity layers. I'll pull them up here just to kind of get them out of the way. Then I'll create 5 groups for each of the toms, just like I did before with the kick and snare. Let's assign these to their proper group. So the top one's already there. Then we have 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5. Then the B samples, 1, 1, 1, 2. If you're wondering why they're staying here, instead of moving to their group, it's because I have all of those groups selected, so it'll show all of them. So that's another way to do it. All right, back in groups view, let's turn on round robin. Boom, just like that. I love that. I used to spend so much time creating round robin groups. Now it's just super quick. So I should have an A sample and a B sample in each one of these. All right, looks good. Let's go back to the keyboard view. And if, by the way, if you don't like dragging them up here, you can do it right here as well. So I can say, okay, I want this one to be on B1. And I can do the same thing here, drag over both of these, pull the key down to B1. Sometimes that's helpful because you don't accidentally, mess up the velocity. There we go. And by the way, in the GM drum kit, your toms are typically going to be sometimes C2. That's only if you have a really high tom, but like B1, A1, G1, and F1. F1 being your floor tom. So the white keys here from like F1 up to C2 are going to be your toms. Pull that down to B1. And now I should have a tom on each one of these. There's the soft sample. Again, much more realistic than just dragging in a single tom sample. Now remember what I said, I'm actually going to create an upper tom above my highest sample tom. So I'm going to go to group view, And with all of these groups selected, I'm going to hit Command-C to copy, Command-V to paste. And I'm going to call these Tom2 1. And then I'm just going to go through and rename them. By the way, something that's really important when working in Sampler, don't ever press Command-Z to undo. If you make a mistake, do not press Command-Z to undo, because your last action in Logic outside of Sampler was to create Sampler, and it'll just get rid of Sampler. So if you mess up within Sampler, hit the undo button up here, and it'll undo your last action. And then now on Tom 2.1 through 2.5, essentially I just have a copy of Tom 1.1 through 5. So what I'm going to do is on each of these groups, I'm going to move the notes down to A1. So this will be the second tom instead of the first tom. Now, right now, these are all going to be the same pitch, but I'll show you how to transpose these in just a bit. And there we go. So now all of the zones are all moved down. Now what I'll do is go back to Zones view. I'll select all of my Tom 1.1 through 1.5 groups, select all of those zones, and right here there's an option to tune them. You can tune this up or down in semitones or half steps. So I'm going to make each of these upper toms +2 semitones, so 2 half steps higher. And then Tom 2, these will all be at the normal tuning. So on B1, I have upper toms. On A1, I have the original Tom 1 at its normal tuning. So now what I'll do is off screen, I'll load in my third tom, my fourth tom, my crash cymbals, and my ride cymbal, all the same way that I did for my kick, snare, tom, and clap. I'm going to save the hi-hats for later because there's something special we have to do with those. All right, so off screen, I loaded in my third and fourth toms, and I also loaded in all my crash cymbals and my ride cymbal. So what I did for the third tom is exactly what I did for the second and first tom. I split it up into 2 velocity layers, 89, and then at 90 to 127. Third tom is on G1, and then I have the floor tom, same thing, 0 to 89, and then 90 to 127. Now for the cymbals, I just created 5 groups for the cymbals, and in each group, there's 3 crash cymbals, a high, low, and medium crash, and then a ride. So for the notes for these, I put the low crash on C sharp 2, the mid crash on D sharp 2, the ride on E2, and then I put the high crash on F sharp 2. Now, normally I think the ride goes on D sharp 2, but I just wanted to keep my crash cymbals on the black keys, then with my ride cymbal on the white key. Okay, so the only thing that's left is the hi-hats. So what I'm going to do is create 5 more groups. These will be the last 5 groups that I create. Turn on round robin for these. Again, it automatically sets that up. Go back into zone view, and I'm going to load in each of my hi-hats to these. Now, with this sample pack, there's a lot of hi-hats. There's like 5 different hi-hats. There's hi-hat close, hi-hat loose, hi-hat open, hi-hat pedal, hi-hat wide open. So what I'm going to do is instead of dragging these all in and assigning them, I'm just going to grab all of the ones of each type, drag those into hi-hat 1 or group 1, then do the same thing for hi-hat 2, just grab all of the 2s for each type, drag those in, go to 3, and then just repeat this process until I have all of these loaded in. All right, so now I have 5 hi-hat samples on each group. So what I'm going to do is select all of these, hit Command A, turn on one shot, turn off pitch. The groups are already assigned, but I need to put these on the correct notes. So I'll go back to keyboard view and I'll assign these. Now, typically, hi-hat is going to be on F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp 1, with A sharp 1 being an open hat, G sharp 1 being a pedal hat, and F#1 being a closed hat. Because I actually have two different open hats and then two closed hats, I'm going to have to put these elsewhere. So when I have extra hi-hats, I generally will put them on the same notes down an octave, in the 0 octave. So what I'll do is my hi-hat closed will go on F#1. Hi-hat loose, which is another closed version, will go on F#0. Hi-hat open will go on A#1. Hi-hat pedal will go on G#1. And then hi-hat wide open will go on A#0. And again, I'll make sure I didn't mess up the velocities of any of these. And then I'll just repeat that process for all 5 groups. All right, so I've got all my hi-hats where they need to go. Let's just play around with these, make sure they work. Now, one big thing you're noticing here is that closed hi-hats do not choke open hi-hats with the way the setup is right now. So we want this to behave, all 5 of these samples, we want these to behave like they're coming from a single hi-hat, like a real-life instrument. So I'll go into group view here, then I'll go to view, visible group list columns, and I'll choose the option that says playback. Now, what this does is it allows you to set the polyphony for any group, the number of voices. So for all 5 of these hi-hat groups, I'm going to set the number of voices to 1. We want this to be an exclusive monophonic group where you can only have one hi-hat playing at once. Then what you want to do is under exclusive, choose an exclusive class. So what this does is it puts all 5 of these in exclusive class once. You can actually create up to 16 different exclusive groups. So now what happens is if I play a closed hi-hat following an open hi-hat, watch what happens. So playing a closed hi-hat after an open hi-hat will choke the open hi-hat, much like this would work in real life. And that's pretty much it in terms of the sample programming. All of the notes are loaded in. The only thing that's left to do is to load this as a multi-output instrument. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the upper menu here, and I'm going to choose Save As, and I'll give my instrument a name. I'll just call it Vintage Kit. There's an option down here that says Save with Audio Data. Make sure that you do this. What this will do is it'll save all of the audio samples. It'll make a copy of them in a separate folder in Logic's samples library. Then I'll hit Save, close out Sampler. And right now, if I were to play back my MIDI region here, it'd play back just fine. But the problem is all the audio is coming off of one channel strip. So if you want to mix the drum kit like a real drum kit, like a real multi-track drum kit, you'll have to load sampler in multi-output mode. Then what you can do is go back into sampler, go to your groups view, and change each of the groups to individual outputs. So for example, I'll make my cymbals go to the main output. I'll make my kick drums go to 3 and 4. I'll make all my snares go to 5 and 6. I'll make my clap go to 7 and 8. I'll make my hi-hats go to 9 and 10. And then if I want individual toms, I can make each tom go to a different output. So I could make it a stereo output, one of these starting at 17, or I could make it mono. I'll just make it mono. So I'll make 11, tom 1. I'll make 12, tom 2. 13 will be tom 3. And then the floor tom 4 will be 14. Now, in the mixer in Logic, I can click this little plus button right here, and it'll create auxiliary multiple outputs off of that sampler instrument. So remember, the order was cymbals on the main, then kick, then snare, then clap, then hi-hat. Then the mono outputs were tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, and tom 4. So now I can give these some separation. I can say, okay, I want my hi-hat to be over to the left a little bit. I want my toms to be panned out a bit just to give them some space, much like they would in a stereo drum recording. Maybe I want to pull the clap down a bit. Maybe I want to pull the hi-hat down a bit. And now let's give this a listen. Now, if you wanted your cymbals to be panned as well, what you could do is go back into zone view, click on each of your cymbal groups, and you can independently control the pan of each of the cymbals. So let's say that I want my high crash to be over to the right. I'll set this to 25% to the right. So this is basically between 0 and 100, and then if you pull down 0 and negative 100. Negative 100 would be hard panned left. So I can set this to like 25 right, crash low, maybe I'll do 30 right, ride, I'll do 30 right, and then my mid, I'll make it like, I don't know, like 25 left. Let me make the crash high a little more toward the center. I'll make it like 15 to the right. And then you could do this for all of these groups. As a matter of fact, I can just select all of these at once instead of having to do them individually. So 15, 30 for the crash low. Crash mid is left 25. Ride is 30 to the right. And there we go. So now there's some panning differences in the cymbals. Now, one other thing that's worth mentioning here is in your modulators section here, you can adjust the velocity sensitivity of the main volume or amplitude envelope. So if you want the instrument to have 0 velocity sensitivity, you can pull this down to 0 and all the notes will, basically play full blast. Or you can pull this up to create more velocity sensitivity. So softer velocities will be softer and higher velocities will be louder. So this adds some extra dynamics on top of the velocity layers that are already there for some of these instruments. In this kit, I didn't have any velocity layers for my cymbals or my hi-hats, so this will be really helpful to make the hi-hats seem more accented. If I pull this down, all the hi-hats are going to sound the same. So it's going to sound a bit robotic. All right, guys, so that wraps up this long format tutorial on advanced drum sampling in Sampler. I hope you learned quite a bit from this. If you did and you liked the video, please leave the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. Thanks for the support, and thanks for watching.